Welcome back to our special bulletin review, Modernizing Federal Government Planning, sponsored by Decision Lens here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Dan Soddy, the chief scientist and co-founder of Decision Lens. I'm Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about the idea of allocating according to priorities. Yep. And that's a little bit of a sort of longitudinal and horizontal situation, because sometimes a very high priority may not be big dollars, whereas something routine is big dollars, but it's a lower priority. So how does that get resolved in this whole environment we've been talking about?
Tom, that's an excellent question. A lot of organizations, what they'll try and do is just fund in order of priority. But the reality is sometimes when you do that, you're not getting the best bang for buck, because you might fund things that are way down the priority list that are extremely expensive and maybe not valuable. But that is where you want to be able to look forward and look at your targets and objectives, because sometimes by spending a dime today, you're going to save $1 in the future. So you really need a multidimensional view of these investments that let you look at their value, the ultimate cost of the investment, the risk associated with it, as well as whether you're balancing properly across your portfolio. If you're an NFL team and you're going to go draft players, you would never draft 6 quarterbacks in a row. That would not create good balance in your team. Similarly, for portfolio planners, they need to make sure that they allocate their resources to support the activities that they do across the business, but that they fund those things that are best bang for buck within the portfolio. So our software solution has the ability to automate that planning, help them see those value against cost, risk, and balance trade-offs, and make smarter decisions with their limited resources.
And the environment, how does it present to people? That is to say, can the executives, can the planners, can the people that are the operators, the acquisition people and so forth that are doing and working in executing the actual steps of a program,
yes,
is everybody in a similar environment, and can they communicate with one another that way? Because that would seem
yes,
to make everybody on the same spreadsheet of music, if you will.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're trying to help them do, is automate the collection of their requirements for the mid-range planning process, the POM, and then be able to start to more effectively connect that to how you spend dollars. Now, one of the challenges brought up by organizations is the way you describe choices in the mid-range are different than the way you do in the monthly or yearly view. So what we say in that case is get started automating each of those phases of the planning process, and then you can work on how you make that translation from mid to short range planning. Whereas today, they're doing it in spreadsheets, they're not really discussing with one another, and those connections cannot be made. So our belief is automate the planning data from submission of requirements through prioritization, through resource allocation decisions, and track that into spend planning to start to create those connections. And you're now into what we call continuous planning. Instead of a spreadsheet, a decision, and it's quickly divorced from reality, you're operating in a living environment to move our planning forward. We're seeing a really enthusiastic response from this, both in DoD and civilian government, as well as in state and local government.
And I imagine, of course, you want to sell lots of copies, but it seems that the more comprehensively this methodology exists across, say, something like the Pentagon,
yes,
and not just within an armed service, because they do have a lot of programs that are cross-service.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking of something like the JADC2 network,
yes,
where each armed service has its piece of it. There's a Pentagon piece, DISA is involved, or
yep,
cloud computing, those types of things that cut across. The more everyone's working with the same methodology, the better it is for the department as a whole for those cross-cutting projects.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Our first customer back in 2008 was the military health system, who was using our software to help do health facility planning. And they were bringing together 3 services who had previously run their own facility planning. And they were now trying to coordinate from an Office of Secretary of Defense level how they do integrated planning. They continue to use the software for that planning till today. It's helped them support major recommendations to Congress that help them get additional funding to support the DoD military healthcare network. And so we have seen that integrated process can add a lot of value, and that is our objective, is bring more visibility both within the services and across services to how you plan. I had mentioned that in 1998 I worked for Air Force Space Command helping them with their POM. Well, that organization has now evolved to Space Force, a big portion of it. And they are now trying to reestablish their planning processes and prepare us for a future. And they deal with very sophisticated capabilities. And how do they do this in a smart way? So we're interested in really driving those discussions throughout the government to improve effectiveness of taxpayer dollars.
All right, and before we move on to some of the civilian aspects of this, just maybe briefly describe what would a really good POM process, and more than a POM process, a good budget process and planning process look like in the end of time here?
Well, first of all, it would be automated versus manually done on spreadsheets. But second of all, it would enable people to really start to establish the critical data needed to make smart trade-off decisions and carry that all the way through your decision processes across planning horizons. And when I talk about what does that data look like, well, it's the data associated with how those requirements will fulfill your future objectives of the organization, but also how they will help you address gaps. And so our solution can help with every aspect of that planning process. What's the relative importance of the gaps in my ability to deliver my mission? What are my issues with how I sustain things? And then how do I smartly allocate dollars to move the needle, to close the gaps, to use our resources wisely to help support our missions? I believe if we don't do this, it erodes our competitive position against our adversaries in the Department of Defense. I've watched this happen over the last 20 to 25 years. The way we stay ahead of them is by smartly allocating resources.
Right, yes, because the DoD does spend a lot of money, but it doesn't always spend it wisely.
Absolutely.
And so the end result is you see another nation's capability, say in hypersonics, and you say, how come we're not there?
Yes, and if that happens in spreadsheets and the logic behind it is lost, you don't learn from it and you don't improve how you do it in the future. So our goal is to bring more continuity and visibility to those choices so that we can systematically improve how we allocate resources.
All right, moving to the civilian side, let's talk about first the Department of Agriculture. You've had some success there, and what did you fix for them?
Yes, we work in many of the USDA organizations. One of them is Aphis, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, where they use our software to help with a variety of strategic decisions to make sure that we keep our food safe, that we address animal-related disease that can occur in the United States. And so it's very mission critical, and it helps protect our citizens if people are more deliberate in how they look at how they respond to these situations as they occur. So we work in the USDA. We've also been working in the Federal Aviation Administration for a number of years, where they use Decision Lens to help around a variety of planning decisions associated with how you deliver air traffic control systems in the future.
Yes, because, well, let's talk about the FAA for a moment. They have a history of having difficulty in rolling out long-term technology projects.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons. They even got, I think, excused from the FAR about 25 years ago so they could somehow have some more flexibility. And these are big projects because every station sometimes needs a technology insert.
Yes.
And then it all has to integrate so that you have a continuous airspace that is safe. So
Yes.
lots of requirements and lots of complexity.
And lots of existing infrastructure that you have to balance all of those trade-offs against. They run facilities all over the United States. And how do you allocate between sustaining the operations of today and being more smart, more deliberate in how you allocate resources to support the next generation of air traffic management?
So it strikes me this process would give an agency a much better view into not only new technology, but in the life cycle maintenance of existing technology.
Yes.
I mean, there are literally places where they have boards that they're afraid to pull out because they might disintegrate.
Yes.
Which means if they planned for that 10 years earlier, they wouldn't be in that position. That kind of thing you see from time to time.
That's absolutely true. In fact, one of the other areas where we work is state and local government, and they're looking at infrastructure planning and how do I build roads and bridges so that they are sustainable over time? How do I prepare for what the future economy is going to look like with infrastructure? These are long-range planning projects that you're trying to balance towards what you're just doing today to get by and making that all the more deliberate. And I believe our planners operate a little bit on crutches in doing this when you're using spreadsheets to try and manage something so sophisticated and complex.
And there's another piece of this too, because all of these require appropriations from lawmakers, whether it's the federal or state or local level.
Yes.
And so you are, as an agency, better armed with facts that are less controvertible.
That's right.
In trying to justify a budget for something. And that enables probably lawmakers to make better decisions about allocation of their appropriations.
We've seen our customers in the DoD, they're at a strategic advantage when they come with recommendations with good logic that engage multiple people in an explicit process where you know you have data integrity. It brings a lot of credibility to what they're recommending.
And just to discuss a little bit more about the Aphis office at USDA, I mean, it seems like a straightforward, you have people out there looking at eggs, looking at chickens, and looking at things, and what's the big deal?
Yes, you need to determine how you react to those situations, and it can vary. Has it become a point where it's an absolute crisis and we need to do something about it and alert the public largely, or is this something that's largely under control, it's not much of a risk to the population? So it's a constant risk management exercise that they're looking at and how to be prepared for these events as they happen in animal and plant health inspection.
And in all of these cases, DOD, state and local, say infrastructure work, FAA, there is a large component of contractors and industry that is feeding into what it is they do, which really supplies most of what they actually do. It's ultimately an acquisition output that results from all of this planning.
That's right.
And so how can contractors and how can industry get rolled up into that planning process?
That's a great question. We actually look at our solution as helping with three key aspects of planning. Connecting across time horizons, which we talked about, connecting across functions, and connecting up and down the organizational hierarchy. What you were just talking about is functions. When we go to build an aircraft carrier, someone else might be building the radar for that aircraft carrier. And if you don't coordinate the radar with the aircraft carrier program and it's delivered too late, you can slow the whole thing down. So by having an integrated process that connects planning, you can look across those various activities where we're building systems that rely on one another. Those are done through contracts, but we can use this software to help manage how we have our government personnel connect the dots in these planning organizations.
And very briefly, I imagine having this kind of knowledge and insight into what's happening in the future and your dollars can save organizations from maybe a little bit of over-exuberant optimism too.
Absolutely, and make sure that they don't misallocate that extra $50 million towards something that is ultimately likely to not support your objectives in the future.
All right, well, I wish we had another hour, but some fascinating stuff, and maybe some people hear this and start to get a hold of their planning too. My guest today has been Dan Soddy, the Chief Scientist and co-founder of Decision Lens. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Decision Lens.